Korea's population crisis is urgent. Korea's birth rate just hit 0.8, one of the lowest ever recorded in human history, and feminism made it impossible to make babies. Korea's #1 show recently is about a 29-year-old woman who'd rather have an AI boyfriend than a baby. It topped the charts in 3 days because every young Korean woman saw it as their autobiography. I've lived in Korea for years, and I spent weeks digging through the psychological and sociological research behind feminism in Korea. And the weird thing is that a labor economist, a famous American Democrat, and one of feminism's own architects all proved the core of it, on their own, from completely different angles. 4 structural forces locked Korea into a trap, and now Korea is a bus packed with adults speeding without brakes, with a handful of children in the back without seatbelts.
Think of the children! Won't somebody please think of the children?
Korea's population is projected to shrink from 52 million to 36 million by 2072. Its total fertility rate hit 0.8 in 2025, one of the lowest on the planet. Seoul is even worse at roughly 0.63, and about half of the country lives in Metro Seoul. For context, the US birth rate is 1.6, France is at 1.56, and Japan is at 1.15. Yet Korea is still a third below even Japan. But here's the stat that locks it in. France has nearly 6 in 10 births happening outside marriage. The UK is about 1 in 2. Korea? 5%. And if you're not married in Korea, you're almost certainly not having kids. And about 3 in 5 women aged 30 to 34 are unmarried. That's why Korea's fertility collapse is structural. The birth crisis is a marriage crisis, the marriage crisis is an economic crisis, and the economic crisis is a gender crisis. Now, I've already made a full video about Korea's gender war that stops them from getting married, so you can watch it here. This video is about the feminist ideology that built the battlefield for the gender war. And before you crucify me for criticizing the last century's golden calf, when I say feminism in this video, I don't mean women shouldn't have rights. I mean the specific policy package Korea runs under the ideology. The unholy alliance between feminism and corporatism. That's the machine. And each gear helps lock the next one in place. We'll get to that.
The feminist masterpiece.
Remember that 29-year-old? That's Mire from Boyfriend on Demand. Blackpink's Jisoo played a 29-year-old webtoon producer who subscribes to a virtual boyfriend, a fake relationship she can control on her schedule with none of the risk. But Mire's exhaustion didn't come from nowhere. Western feminism was born in 19th century Europe and refined in 20th century America. And it was exported to a culture that compressed centuries of modern change into 30 years. The West took roughly 5 generations to bring women into the workforce. Korea did it in 1. And feminism was imported wholesale at the same time as the economic miracle. So let's take a quick stroll down K-feminism memory lane. Korea passed the Equal Employment Opportunity Act in 1987, the first gender discrimination law on the books. But it barely mattered in a country where most women resigned when they got married. The real shift came a decade later. The 1997 IMF crisis gutted the Korean economy, wiped out lifetime employment, and companies laid off millions of men. Almost overnight, families couldn't rely on the old sole breadwinner model. By 2000, more women were working than before the crisis. The mortgage didn't care about tradition, and workplace gender equality was already legalized a decade before anyone went broke. The crisis opened the door. Feminist policy walked through it and bolted it shut. And here's why. Korea runs on chaebol corporatism. Chaebols are massive family-controlled South Korean corporate conglomerates that dominate the national economy. Samsung alone accounts for roughly a fifth of the country's GDP, and the top 5 chaebols together make up over half. The government and the chaebols operate as a single system, and they decided to mobilize women as a labor source. In 2001, the government built a standalone Ministry of Gender Equality, aka MOGEF. By 2004, political parties got gender quotas. All new legislation started getting mandatory gender impact assessments. What the West built through decades of activism and corporate pressure, Korea legislated top-down in 7 years. And nobody stopped to ask what theoretically doubling the labor supply in a single generation would do to wages. So the discourse goes like this. Feminism doubled the workforce and halved wages. Anti-feminism critic Rachel Wilson put it plainly on Joe Rogan.
In the 40s and 50s, you could be a janitor and support a family on one income. The one big thing that we changed is we pushed women into college and into the workforce. So in the span of about 20 years, we almost doubled the labor force by pushing all the women in, and men's wages have never recovered.
An economist named Jorgen Harris proved the mechanism, occupation by occupation. He tracked 50 years of US Census data and built a way to isolate the supply shock itself, stripped of everything else. And the numbers were clear. For every 10 percentage point increase in the female share of an occupation, male wages dropped 8% and female wages dropped 7%. Over a decade, male wages fell 9% and female wages fell 14%. Let's look at how this played out in Korea. 20 years ago, Korean men held more degrees than women. Today, about 3 in 4 women hold degrees, overtaking men at 3 in 5. The workforce feminized faster than anywhere in the developed world. And the wage data shows exactly what Harris would predict. Korean productivity rose nearly 47% between 1995 to 2015, but real wages only rose 27%. Youth wages rose just 6% in 7 years. Feminism got the credit, while families got the bill. And the result is what Elizabeth Warren wrote a whole book about in 2003, the two-income trap. When most families have 2 earners, the market adjusts. Sure, life becomes super affordable at first, but housing, childcare, rent, everything reprices upward to absorb both salaries. And once that happens, the trap locks shut. A single income can no longer cover what it used to because the entire economy now assumes there are 2. And children are expensive, and it costs $300,000 US to raise 1 child in Korea from birth to 18 years old, which is about 8 times the average person's annual income. So now, nearly 6 in 10 Korean families with children need 2 incomes. And once the trap locks shut, the ideology becomes invisible, because now it just looks like economics. By the way, if you like deep dives like this, don't forget to like and sub. So like fish in the water, nobody thinks they're living inside a feminist policy framework. They just think rent is expensive. But there's a cost that didn't get split evenly. The cost is time and energy. And by now, everyone knows women do more routine housework than men, even though men do more sporadic ad hoc housework. And Korea's version has a unique spin. In 2014, university-educated Korean mothers with young children spent 230 minutes a day on childcare. Fathers spent 36. By 2019, the broader picture wasn't much better. Women were averaging 3 hours and 15 minutes of unpaid domestic labor per day, and men were at 56 minutes. If you're a millennial or a Gen Z woman who grew up in Korea, the promise was get educated, get a career, and life will be good. But reality showed her that she'll come home to a second shift of childcare or elder care, or both. Feeling guilty, she can't juggle everything. So why can't she just keep working full-time and split equally with the man? Well, in Korea, there's the Nuna wall. Korea's honorific system locks hierarchy in place. You can't avoid it if you speak the language. Every relationship has its own word, based on age and gender. When I was a teacher in Korea, orientation taught us that when students meet for the first time, the first thing they figure out is everyone's age. Because they need to know which words to use, the workplace is no different. A younger boss can't give a Nuna a performance review without feeling like a nephew correcting his aunt at dinner. And messing up honorifics can be disrespectful in Korean workplaces. In fact, workplaces are now mandating workarounds like using English names. But then you face another challenge, since everyone's called David Kim, Lee, or Park. Sorry, couldn't resist.
David Kim is a valuable asset for this company, and we're not going to delete him.
True story. I have friends in Korea who hit the Nuna wall and quit because work opportunities became limited. But the family still needed her income. So now she's raising the kid, caring for her parents 3 hours outside Seoul, and adding gig or temporary work when possible. And her story isn't unusual. Nearly 3 in 4 informal elder care responsibilities fall on women, mostly daughters and daughters-in-law. And that just compounds with everything else. And this isn't just Korea. Economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers documented it in 2009. Across every industrialized country they measured, women's happiness had been falling for 35 years straight, even as their rights, wages, and opportunities improved. The more women gained on paper legally and economically, the worse they felt in reality. And Korea is the most extreme version of that pattern. Kaiser and colleagues measured it in 2025. They looked at how people evaluate their lives and how they actually feel day to day at the same time, across the world, over 50 years. And they found that women consistently report higher life satisfaction than men. But their daily negative emotions, stuff like stress, sadness, anxiety, physical pain, have gotten significantly worse compared to men. The paper names South Korea as a textbook case. Korean women rate their lives nearly half a point higher than Korean men on a 10-point scale, and they report worse daily stress, sadness, and worry. And here's what makes it crueler. For decades, feminist theory told women that wanting to stay home with their children was patriarchal conditioning dressed up as instinct. But data from 76 countries says that was wrong. Every major study across 200,000 people found the same thing. The richer and more equal a country gets, the more men and women split toward traditional preferences. Men lean towards working with things, women lean towards working with people and caregiving. These preferences are real, they're measurable, and they get stronger when women have the financial means and legal right to choose. But Korea's an outlier. It's as rich as Germany, but its gender preference gap looks more like Greece or Thailand. And this is where the two-income trap meets Korea's labor market. Korean work culture doesn't have a flexible gear. Companies expect 50-plus hour weeks, so when a woman wants to scale back, she can't. She either works full chaebol hours or drops out entirely. There's no solid middle ground. And dropping out means the two-income trap eats her family alive. And the system that pushed her there, it's still running. Remember that ministry MOGAF? By 2026, its budget had grown to nearly 3 trillion won a year. And unlike Western diversity programs where companies can choose to walk away, Korea's version is criminal law. Despite a whole ministry with teeth, after 25 years of enforcement, female executive representation across Korea's top 100 companies sat at only 6.3%. But a system importing Western gender equality frameworks straight into Confucian corporate hierarchy is destined for a collision. 3 trillion won a year, criminal enforcement, mandatory gender quotas with no real penalties, and after 25 years, 6.3%. The framework has teeth, but the culture has a stronger jaw. About 3 in 4 Korean working women report gender discrimination in promotion, and the number one reason they cite is male-centered workplace culture. Promotions, deals, and loyalty are still built at hwishik, after-work drinking sessions that can hurt your career if you skip. So you can legislate a quota, but you can't legislate who gets invited to the second round of soju, noraebang, or jjimjilbang. And the feminist response is, that's just misogyny. Enforce harder. But Korea already enforces harder than any Western country. At some point, the question stops being, are you enforcing enough? And starts being, are you enforcing the right framework? Because MOGAF isn't a Korean invention, it's a Western feminist template dropped into a Confucian society that runs on hierarchy and age-based deference. The same voices that criticize Western colonialism against indigenous cultures go quiet when the export is feminism into indigenous Korean culture. The East Asia Forum put it plainly. The MOGAF was created as an economic policy, not social policy, in direct response to the 1997 IMF crisis that exposed how much GDP the country was leaving on the table by keeping women at home. The chaebols needed workers, and MOGAF was the government engine. But Korea can't dismantle the engine, even though it's eating the car. President Yoon campaigned on abolishing MOGAF and won partly on that promise. He still couldn't do it. The moment any Korean politician touches the ministry, domestic backlash erupts, and the international press frames it as an attack on women's rights, which hurt foreign investment. And that's a risk no one will take. When Yoon's government proposed restructuring MOGAF in 2023, the international framing went straight to rolling back on women's rights before the data even got a hearing. Korea is facing extinction and cannot possibly question the ideology accelerating it. The 2025 snap election showed a nearly 40-point gender gap among voters under 30. Young men voting conservative, young women voting progressive. Any politician who touches MOGAF loses one half of an entire generation. And the chaebols? There's a saying, if Samsung does well, Korea does well. Koreans have lived inside that belief for so long, it's invisible. And then there's the other arm. Korea has poured over $220 billion into pro-natalist programs since 2006. That's 88 trillion won, about $65 billion in 2025 alone. Cash bonuses for having babies, subsidies for childcare, longer parental leave, basically begging families to have more kids. That's about 30 times what MOGAF gets. And MOGAF is still winning, because it doesn't run on money. It runs on the same fuel that drives DEI programs in the West: ideology, shaming, and a stick. Anyone who questions the system gets automatically branded anti-women, feminism over civilizational survival. And the chaebols are happy to let it ride, because they collect on both ends. More workers keeps wages low, and chaebol jobs pay roughly 60% more than small and mid-sized companies, so everyone's fighting to get in. That's the labor side. But the money she earns goes right back to them. Chaebol priced rent for chaebol-owned apartments. Chaebol run daycare so she can keep working chaebol hours. Her salary becomes a pass-through instead of wealth. The elite don't have a fertility problem. They have nannies, family offices, and options. And in fact, this blew my mind. More than half of all Korean babies born in the last decade were born to the top third of earners. The bottom third? 9%. So for the elite, it's everyone else's kids who aren't being born. The system works perfectly for the chaebols who designed it and fund their candidates. And the people running chaebols are untouchable. 6 of the 10 largest chaebol leaders have been convicted of white-collar crime. Most were pardoned or had their sentences cut. They're too big to jail. So they keep feminism going to keep wages down and prices up and maintain fatter margins. And the women who figured out they were inputs did the only rational thing left. They did the math. Youngmi was 25 when she shaved her head and quit dating. She'd grown up in Daegu, one of Korea's most conservative cities, with an abusive father. Her mother eventually fled, leaving Youngmi and her sister behind. Her sister started losing hair from stress at 8 years old. Youngmi spent years unable to leave the house without makeup, convinced she needed to be desirable to survive. And one day, she realized she was working for a system that had never worked for her. She joined the 4B movement, and when you hear her story, there's a logic to it. Jisoo's Mireille chose a virtual boyfriend over a real one. Youngmi shaved her head and quit dating entirely. One is fiction and resonated with all women. The other is real, and both did the same math. The Korea Development Institute found that about 40% of the recent drop in fertility comes down to women looking at the situation and deciding motherhood isn't worth the career hit. And you might think, that's just economics. Feminism has nothing to do with it. But feminism is the reason the old option disappeared. A generation ago, a Korean woman could marry a salaryman and raise her children, and nobody called it oppression. Feminist ideology, delivered through 4 years of university education, where about 3 in 4 of all Korean women now hold degrees, reframed that arrangement as dependence and oppression. In the 1980s, marriage and children was the mainstream Korean life path for women. The reframe of that choice as failure is a more recent development. Independence became the one thing a modern Korean woman could never be. Rachel Wilson pointed out that women's access to higher education is the top correlate to falling birth rates because the ideology in that education makes motherhood feel like failure. This is literally the angst my wife had for nearly 2 decades of marriage and 3 children and being a full-time mom. Am I not fulfilling my full potential? So even when psychology says a present mom produces far better outcomes for the children, the ideology says choosing that makes you a victim of patriarchy. This framing kills the option before the economy finishes burying it. And the data on happiness tells you how backwards society's got it. In America, married mothers are nearly 3 times as likely to report being very happy as unmarried childless women. 41% versus 14%. What feminism is telling women to reject is where women report themselves the happiest. But in Korea, married women score a full point below their husbands on life satisfaction, and almost 4 in 10 say they wouldn't marry again. The difference between the US and Korea is what Korean marriage demands: full chaebol hours, a second shift at home. Many Korean women are now choosing to walk away from marriage and children because the consumer economy needs it to stay this way. Globally, women drive roughly 80% of consumer spending. Every BTS concert, every K-drama, every influencer reinforcing the career and Edia coffee lifestyle, the chaebols need her labor and her consumption. And her spending pays for the culture that reinforces the ideology. And some women saw through the grift. Youngmi's tribe, the 4B movement, no marriage, no childbirth, no dating, no sex, is puny. Somewhere between 5,000 and 50,000 followers. But it hits the news because total withdrawal makes sense when the system only offers you exhaustion or poverty. And the system that made Youngmi's calculus inevitable, someone designed it on purpose. The leading second-wave feminist Simone de Beauvoir said it plainly on June 14, 1975 in a Saturday Review dialogue with Betty Friedan. No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children. Society should be totally different. Women should not have that choice, precisely because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that one. De Beauvoir was describing the future. She knew women would choose family if given the option, and she said the system should make sure they never got that option. 50 years later, corporatist Korea built exactly the system she asked for, and Korea is living inside the results. As author Louise Perry put it, traditions are experiments that worked, and Korea, under duress, rejected traditionalism and implemented feminism wholesale, running it at 5 times the speed. And the results of 0.8 total fertility rate are in. But this goes beyond Korea. Total fertility rate in Italy is at 1.18, Spain 1.12, Japan 1.2, China roughly 1, the US is at 1.62 and falling, Germany 1.36. TFR is dropping everywhere. This is happening everywhere the same unholy marriage goes. Feminism provides the ideology, corporatism provides the engine. 4 gears, the needle is at red line, and making babies in Korea became impossible, unless you're rich. If you like this video, you'll like this one. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like and sub.